It was a quiet Thursday morning at Marrow Creek Elementary, the kind of morning where the scent of dry erase markers and pencil shavings filled the air, and the soft hum of children writing was only interrupted by the occasional cough or squeaky chair. But that calm shattered the moment Officer Thorne Whitlock stepped into room 2C, his K-9 partner Vex trotting silently beside him. The visit was supposed to be routine, part of a community outreach program on safety. The kids were thrilled. The teachers were grateful. No one expected what would happen next. Vex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a flawless service record, was known for his discipline. But as soon as he crossed the threshold of the classroom, his body language changed. His tail stiffened, his ears shot forward, and his eyes locked, not on the children, but on the colorful bulletin board on the back wall. Officer Whitlock noticed it immediately. "Easy, boy," he whispered, placing a hand on the dog's harness. But Vex didn't settle. His chest rumbled with a low growl. His nose twitched. 9-year-old Juniper Ellis, known as June by her classmates, tilted her head. "He doesn't like the wall," she whispered to her friend Merritt, who was already staring at the same spot. "That's where I heard the tapping," he muttered, recalling a moment from last week he hadn't told anyone about. Vex's growl grew louder, then erupted into a single sharp bark. He lunged toward the board, startling the entire class. The teacher, Ms. Odessa Lang, stepped forward quickly but stopped when she saw the intensity in the dog's eyes. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tense. The room fell completely silent as Vex began clawing and biting at the paper-covered board. Corner ripped free. Behind it, the dull brown of aged plywood peeked through. Then metal, a narrow strip of rusted steel, embedded in the wall like a forgotten lock. Whitlock's face shifted. His training kicked in, but something deeper stirred, an unease he couldn't place. "Everyone out. Now," he said, voice calm but commanding. Odessa didn't question it. She began herding the students out the door, her heart racing. But June lingered, staring at the wall. "It was never there before," she said softly. Vex let out a final, trembling whine and laid down, staring at the same spot. As the last child left, Officer Whitlock knelt beside the exposed section. The metal strip ran deeper than it should have, far deeper than any school wall required. He touched it lightly, cold, solid, sealed, not part of the original construction. From the hallway, Principal Silas Varnell appeared, his expression already tight with tension. "Is something wrong, officer?" he asked, though the stiffness in his jaw suggested he already knew. Whitlock didn't look back. His fingers stayed pressed against the strange steel embedded in the wall. Something had been hidden there, and not recently. Whatever it was, Vex had found it first. Officer Thorne Whitlock stood motionless, his hands still resting on the cold, rusted strip of metal embedded deep in the wall. The hallway outside buzzed faintly with murmurs. Parents being called, students relocated. But inside room 2C, silence reigned. Vex sat beside him, alert but still. It wasn't just a wall. It wasn't just a board. Whatever this was, it didn't belong in a school built in 1971. Thorne had been in enough buildings, enough hidden rooms and sealed doors, to know when something had been deliberately concealed. Principal Silas Varnell lingered in the doorway, his expression tightly controlled. "You're scaring the children, Officer Whitlock," he said calmly, though his eyes betrayed something else. Concern or guilt? Thorne rose slowly, brushing dust from his palms. "This metal strip doesn't match the materials used in the school's original blueprints," he replied without turning to look at the principal. "And my dog doesn't bark at bulletin boards for fun." Varnell's lips tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he glanced at the wall and quickly back at Thorne. "You'll need to file a formal request with the district if you want to take that wall apart." Outside, 10-year-old Merritt stood alone, gripping a rolled-up piece of paper under his arm. He had brought it that day to show Ms. Lang, a faded architectural map his grandfather had kept from his days as a contractor. Merritt's grandfather helped with a renovation at the school in 1984, and the boy had been fascinated by the old layouts. But something bothered him. The room labeled maintenance storage on the original map didn't appear on any current school floor plan. That room was supposed to be located right behind room 2C's back wall. Merritt hesitated. Then, gripping the map tighter, he walked toward the administrative wing. He wasn't supposed to be there, but curiosity burned hotter than fear. He ducked past the office and into the records room, a place he had only seen once during a student council field trip. The door was ajar. Inside, boxes of files lined the shelves, and dust floated through thin strips of sunlight. He unrolled his map and began comparing it to the emergency map posted by the door. There was no doubt now, a section of the building had been erased. Back in room 2C, Odessa Lang returned briefly to retrieve her gradebook. She paused at the wall, now half exposed, and stared at the torn paper and metal beneath. Her throat tightened. She had seen that steel once before, when she was a child in this very room before they covered it. No one believed her back then. It was never just a wall, she whispered, and this time she was afraid the truth was coming back for all of them. The night settled heavy over Marrow Creek Elementary, blanketing the school grounds in an eerie stillness. Inside room 2C, the lights were off, but Officer Thorne Whitlock had returned alone, flashlight in hand and Vex close at his side. The janitor had let him in after hours, reluctantly, murmuring that this place holds onto things. Thorne hadn't asked what he meant. He didn't need to. The air in the room felt different, dense, charged. Even Vex, usually steady after sunset, kept shifting his weight uneasily, eyes glued to the damaged wall. Thorne crouched beside the strip of metal again. He tapped it gently with the flashlight, solid steel. The reverberation wasn't hollow, but it wasn't solid either. There was space behind it, cavity, a hidden chamber. He traced the outline of the metal with his gloved fingers, noticing how cleanly it had been embedded. Whoever put it there knew exactly what they were doing and wanted it to disappear. "Why here?" he whispered to himself. Vex let out a low whine, ears twitching. Suddenly, a faint noise rippled through the wall. Thorne froze. Not just any noise, a slow, rhythmic scraping, like metal dragging lightly over concrete. Vex stood instantly, tail stiff and nose pointing toward the center of the wall. The sound came again, just once more, then silence. Thorne's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He stood slowly, backing away. This wasn't an echo. It wasn't pipes. Someone or something was behind that wall, and it had just moved. Elsewhere, young Merritt Klein sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, poring over the floor plans with a flashlight. He had circled the spot where room 2C met the sealed space, drawing arrows and notes in the margins. His curiosity had turned to obsession. He felt it in his gut. Whatever was behind that wall didn't want to be found, but that only made him more determined. He reached for an old rotary phone on his nightstand, dialed a number he'd memorized from the school directory, and whispered into the receiver, "Ms. Lang, I found something. I think we need to talk." Meanwhile, Ms. Odessa Lang sat in her dimly lit living room, flipping through a dusty scrapbook filled with photos of her childhood at Marrow Creek. One picture caught her eye, her old second-grade class, standing in front of room 2C. There, in the corner of the frame, a shadow stood near the wall. No face, no explanation, just a blur where no one was supposed to be. She shivered and reached for the phone. It rang before she touched it. She answered, already knowing who it was. "Merritt," she said softly, voice trembling. "I think I remember what's behind that wall." Officer Thorne Whitlock sat in his cruiser, parked just outside the school's side entrance. The early morning mist had started to roll in, curling through the empty playground like fingers reaching for something unseen. Vex sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes locked on the darkened school windows. Neither of them had slept. After the noise behind the wall, Thorne had contacted the district to request blueprints and access to historical building records. What he received instead was silence and a warning. "Drop it. It's a sealed case," the voice on the other end had said. But no one told him what case. Inside her home, Ms. Odessa Lang had cleared off her dining table and laid out old photos, school maps, and a yellowed newspaper clipping she had found tucked inside her yearbook. The headline read, "Local janitor vanishes from Marrow Creek School. No leads after 6 weeks." Odessa had forgotten his name until now. Calvin Rourke, a quiet man with a limp and a kind smile. He'd always hummed old gospel tunes while cleaning the hallways. Then one day in 1985, he simply vanished. The story had been buried. No police follow-up. No memorial. Just silence. When Merritt arrived at her door holding his grandfather's floor plans, Odessa felt a chill spread through her chest. She let him in, and together they laid out the original layout over a more recent map. The difference was undeniable. An entire maintenance corridor and back room had been sealed off. Not just repurposed or renovated, erased. Why would they hide a janitor's room? Merritt asked. Odessa didn't have an answer, but deep in her mind, something old and heavy stirred. A memory she had buried for decades. Back at the school, Thorne entered the records office again, this time with official clearance and Vex at his side. He requested access to all archived blueprints and construction logs. The office manager, a nervous man named Ellison Griggs, handed him a single box labeled Maintenance 1984. Thorne opened it carefully. Inside, dust, brittle paper, and one folder missing. "Where's the Rourke file?" he asked. Griggs blinked, confused. I've never heard of a Rourke. Are you sure that's even from this school?" Thorne looked up sharply. "You've worked here how long?" 22 years, Griggs answered. "And in all that time, no one ever mentioned a man who disappeared inside these walls?" Griggs hesitated. "They told us not to talk about it." That was all Thorne needed to hear. He closed the folder, stood up, and gave Vex a quiet nod. It was time to open that wall, official clearance or not. The wall came down at exactly 3:47 a.m. Officer Thorne Whitlock had waited until the building was empty. No students, no teachers, no watchful eyes. Just him, Vex, and a crowbar. He worked methodically, starting at the corner of the steel strip. With each crack and pull, the sound echoed through the quiet halls like a warning. Vex didn't bark. He simply stood guard, his eyes fixed, his body coiled with silent tension. When the final panel fell, Thorne stepped back. Behind it was a second wall, older, cracked, and painted in faded green, a color that hadn't been used in the school in decades. The strange part wasn't just that it was hidden, it was what was written on it. Dozens of names, etched in shaky handwriting, covered the surface. Children's names. Some were marked with dates. Others had small excess beside them. And near the bottom, in larger, darker letters, was one name that stopped Thorne cold. Odessa Lang, 1975. He reached out, tracing the letters with his fingers. His breath caught in his throat. What the hell is this? Odessa Lang didn't need to see it to know it was there. She had dreamed about that wall for years. In her dreams, the names whispered. In her dreams, they bled. Now, sitting in her car outside the school with Merritt beside her, she stared through the windshield, unable to move. "I was taken there once," she said. "When I was 7. I thought it was a dream, or something I imagined. But I remember the green paint, the humming, and a voice behind the door saying my name." Merritt was pale, gripping the old map in his lap. "What kind of room was it?" She shook her head. "Not a classroom, not a janitor's closet. It was cold, windowless, and it had mirrors. One-way mirrors, like an observation room." Her voice cracked. "And Calvin Rourke. He was the only one who came looking for me, the only one who believed something was wrong. And then, he disappeared." Inside the wall cavity, Thorne found an old door frame, sealed with thick bolts and plaster. But the bolts had been cut. Recently, someone else had already been in. The air smelled of rust and damp wood. Vex whimpered, backing up a step. Then came the sound again, the soft scrape, like metal over stone. But this time it was closer. And then, the whisper, "Thorne." The whisper sent a chill down Thorne's spine. He spun around, flashlight cutting through the dust-filled air. No one was there, just the torn drywall, the rusted frame, and the passage behind it. Vex was frozen, ears pinned back, tail low, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the exposed door. Thorne took a slow breath, raised his light, and stepped forward. The corridor beyond was narrow, with low ceilings and faded linoleum flooring. On either side, the walls were lined with chipped tile, stained and cracked. Every sound he made echoed unnaturally, like the hallway itself was listening. A few feet in, he found it, a one-way mirror just as Odessa had described. On the other side, a small room, square, windowless, and still intact. A single metal chair sat bolted to the floor, facing a blank wall. In the corner, a microphone, disconnected, but still mounted. It was a room meant for watching, for isolating, maybe even for breaking someone. Thorne's hand trembled slightly as he wiped dust from the glass. "What the hell were they doing down here?" he muttered. Odessa and Merritt were on their way, unable to stay away any longer. Odessa's hands gripped the steering wheel like a lifeline. Her memories were now sharp, cutting into her with alarming clarity. She remembered being told she had hallucinated as a child, remembered the school counselor who vanished weeks later. She had convinced herself it was childhood imagination, but the green walls, the names, the sound of her own name being whispered in an empty hallway, it was all real. "I wasn't crazy," she whispered. Back inside, Thorne noticed something scratched into the back of the mirror frame. Just a few words, carved with something sharp. He tried to help. They took him instead. His throat tightened. "Rourke," he said aloud. "The missing janitor. The man who vanished without a trace." Thorne turned, heart pounding, and aimed his flashlight at the floor. There scratches, drag marks, faint but real. Something or someone had been pulled into this space. And not recently, decades ago. Then Vex growled again, low and steady. He was staring down the hall toward the back, where the light didn't reach. Thorne raised his flashlight, but the beam flickered. Once, twice, then died completely. Darkness swallowed the hallway. For a moment, everything was still. Then a soft creak, like a door slowly opening. Thorne reached for his sidearm, every instinct screaming, but he didn't retreat. Whatever was hiding in the school, it had waited long enough. The silence inside the hidden corridor felt heavier than any darkness Thorne Whitlock had ever walked through. The flashlight was dead. The emergency backup on his vest flickered dimly, casting long, broken shadows on the warped walls. Vex stayed glued to his side, his growl now a deep vibration in his chest. Ahead, a faint orange glow appeared at the end of the hallway. It wasn't fire, but something else, old, artificial, and pulsating, like a dying heartbeat buried in concrete. Thorne moved toward it slowly, hand on his weapon. The corridor opened into a larger room, an octagonal chamber, lined with broken monitors and rusted cabinets. Surveillance equipment from the late 70s was scattered across the floor. Thick cables ran across the ceiling and disappeared into the walls. In the center of the room was a single steel gurney, rusted and cold, with cracked leather straps hanging loosely at its edges. Thorne's breath caught as he stepped inside. This wasn't a classroom. It was an observation unit, something built and then erased from record. Vex approached a closed filing cabinet in the corner and scratched at it once. Thorne moved toward it, forcing the drawer open with his crowbar. Inside were brittle manila folders, their edges flaking from time. He pulled one at random. It read, Subject, C. Rourke, Staff Disappearance. Inside were typed reports, memos, and one black and white photo clipped to the top. It was Calvin Rourke, standing beside a chalkboard in room 2C, with a child seated next to him, Odessa Lang. The file wasn't about the janitor vanishing. It was about what he saw. Behind him, a low creaking noise echoed again. Thorne turned, and his flashlight picked up movement, a reflection inside one of the dusty monitor screens. At first, it looked like his own silhouette, but it blinked, then stepped back. It wasn't him. Someone or something was watching from the other side. He raised the light higher, and for a split second, he saw a man's face. Sunken, pale, with eyes wide open, mouth half-parted like he was about to speak. Odessa and Merritt burst through the entrance at that moment, drawn by instinct and fear. Odessa froze as her eyes met the walls. "This is the place," she whispered. "They brought us here, made us sit, stare at lights, answer questions, then told us we imagined it all." She stepped toward the mirror and placed her hand on it. From the other side, a faint breath fogged the glass, and etched into it, slowly from the inside, appeared 5 trembling letters, L-A-N-G. Odessa Lang stood paralyzed as the image in the mirror grew more distinct. The boy didn't blink, didn't move. He simply stared, his face pale, almost translucent, eyes full of something that wasn't quite sorrow, but something close. He lifted his hand and pressed it gently against the glass. Odessa, trembling, mirrored the gesture. A cold sensation spread through her palm as their fingers aligned. "Danny," she breathed, the name tasting like dust on her tongue after being buried for decades. The boy didn't speak. Instead, he turned his head slightly and pointed to the far wall, the one Vex had been growling at since they arrived. Thorne reacted without hesitation. He retrieved the sledgehammer from his bag and approached the wall, every instinct in his body tensing. With each heavy swing, concrete cracked and split, the sound reverberating through the old observation chamber like thunder rolling through a forgotten grave. On the 4th strike, the wall gave in, revealing a crawlspace narrow and deep. The air that spilled out was stale, damp, and cold, as if it had been trapped there for decades. Vex refused to enter. He whined once, then sat back, ears pinned. Thorne leaned in with his flashlight and muttered, "Jesus!" Inside the narrow chamber was a crude living space, bare foam mats, shredded blankets, and scattered remains of food packaging from the 1980s. But what dominated the space was the back wall, completely covered in a chaotic mural. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of drawings filled the surface. Stick figures of children, classrooms, teachers, desks, and always, in the background, a tall, faceless figure, arms long, posture slouched, lurking just out of reach. Odessa stepped inside slowly, eyes wide, lips trembling. "They made us draw him," she whispered, "and then they took the drawings away, said it was just our imagination." Merritt spotted a section near the bottom where names were scratched into the wall with what looked like a broken pen cap or fingernail. At the center, Danny L. Below it, other names written in different handwriting, children who'd come after him. "He wasn't alone," Merritt said quietly. "They brought more. They were keeping track, maybe even studying them." Odessa traced the names with her fingers, each one a memory unsealed. "They said it was a gifted program, but none of us were gifted. We were just chosen." In a dusty lockbox, Thorne found a stack of cassette tapes, each labeled by year and subject number. He grabbed one dated April 1985 and slipped it into a battered player on the floor. Static. Then a voice, adult, clinical. "Subject 14 continues to report visual contact with shadow entity. Subject shows no signs of fabrication. Observation will resume after lights out." Then quietly came Danny's voice. Weak, hollow. "He stands in the corners, even when it's dark, even when I sleep." Odessa knelt, covering her mouth. She was no longer remembering. She was finally hearing what no one had believed. The cassette tape clicked as it ended, but the silence that followed was louder than any sound. Odessa Lang remained kneeling, her hands still over her mouth, her eyes glazed with disbelief and recognition. Danny's voice still echoed in her mind. Not just the words, but the way he had said them. Tired, empty, broken. He had been left in that room, abandoned by a system that denied he ever existed. And now, nearly 4 decades later, he was still here, etched into the walls, the tapes, the air. Thorne stepped back, his face grim. "They didn't just forget him," he said. "They buried him." The mural on the wall behind them shimmered under the weak beam of Thorne's flashlight. Stick figures seemed to shift in the dim light, not literally, but through the weight of suggestion. Odessa stood slowly and stepped toward the far corner, where an older section of the wall was partially caved in. Behind it was something she hadn't noticed before. A small wooden box, half rotted from time. She knelt and opened it carefully. Inside were more drawings. Folded, aged, some stained with what looked like water or tears. Each one signed in the corner, DL. She picked one up. It was a drawing of room 2C viewed from inside the wall. The teacher at the front, children seated, and in the back corner, through the mirror, Danny watching. He could see us, she whispered. All those years. He watched class continue like nothing happened. Merritt's voice was shaky. Why didn't anyone hear him? Odessa answered without turning. Because no one wanted to. Because the adults were told it was handled. And the children, we were told to forget. Thorne collected the tapes, photos, and the notebook, storing them carefully in his evidence case. This needs to go public, he said. District cover-up or not. Odessa looked at him. They'll bury it again. You know they will. Thorne met her eyes. Then we don't give them the chance. He pulled out his phone and began uploading photos, files, everything to a secure drive. If they shut this down, it'll already be out there. No more secrets. As they stepped out of the hidden room and back into the cold hallway, Vex let out a soft, low whimper. Not fear, but release. The tension that had followed them through every wall, every door, seemed to dissolve. Behind them, the mirror in the observation room fogged over one last time. As Odessa turned, she saw it. The boy's face peaceful now, his eyes soft, and then he faded. The school closed room 2C the following week. The official reason was structural damage. But Odessa, every time she passed the old building, would look up at the window above that room and smile, just barely. Because now, finally, Danny had been seen. And sometimes that's all the forgotten need to be remembered.